Hello, welcome everybody. Good morning, good evening if you're watching this at night. We are here today to talk about the importance of authentic literature for LGBTQI families, but I'm also thinking more broadly, actually, not just for those families. I think obviously our books and the stories we share are going to be really interesting for all kinds of different families. I know that I think Emma will be particularly helpful talking to us about that, about her experience of reading with her child. So let me introduce everybody to you. This morning we have Sarah Hagger-Holt, who is a writer for middle grade readers. She's also a mom. And so the middle grade, I didn't know about middle grade writing, what that particular category was, but it's for 9 to 13-year-olds. So we'll be looking forward to hearing from Sarah about her books and her stories, and also how she came to write those stories. Emma Miller McCaffrey, I already know Emma. Hello, lovely to meet you again. Online virtually. So Emma has, you should definitely look at her amazing biography. She's got a very long, illustrious history of working in different representation for different charities, but she and I know each other through Diversity Role Models, which is a schools charity. So lovely to see you, Emma. And Emma is also a parent, obviously, as I was saying, and she is going to be telling us about how she reads with her child and the sort of books that they choose and what the significance of that is. And Carolyn Robertson, hello, lovely to see you. Carolyn has written books for younger children, illustrated children's books, and she is also a mum. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your journey to publishing and what was out there before, and what made you decide to bring your own books to us. So, and me, I'm an actor and a writer. I haven't written children's books. And one of the things that I'd like to talk about first with our panel is as we were growing up, what there was available, and then now to now, you know, how we're finding it now. But first of all, let me talk to Sarah. And Sarah, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Yes, so as Sophie said, I write novels for middle grade, so for the kind of pre-teen age range, which are all about stories about family and friendship and all the things that maybe are quite familiar in your life when you're that age. So I did a lot of channeling my kind of inner 12-year-old. There's lots about falling out with your best friend, you know, being in the school play, all of those kind of things. But for me, it's really important that those stories center around LGBTQ plus families. And it's quite, that's quite obvious because I think those family dynamics lend something extra or something interesting to the story. They're not everything, but actually by not putting our families in books, we kind of miss out on some really interesting stories and some great kind of some great characters and situations that we can share with young people. So that's not my full-time job. I also work as I work for charities and businesses as a copywriter, but have been spending the last few years as well writing stories, which has been joyful, particularly now that my kids are in the right age bracket to read them, and they have been very excited about it after initial bit of hesitancy about what was I doing. Now they are super proud and go, now the bookshops are open, we'll be back in the bookshops looking for my books.
Great. Oh well, I want to hear all about them, and I'm looking to see if you. I can see that you've cleverly turned the titles towards us.
Yeah, that's why I was doing bookshops as well. If you see them there, quick, turn them round. Let's have a look.
Oh yeah, very good. Yes. And Emma, so tell us a little bit about your background and how you have come to embrace LGBTQ plus literature.
So I started out my working career as a teacher in secondary school. And so I did quite a bit while I was teaching to kind of support those children that were coming to me, you know, sort of teenage years, possibly questioning or knowing what their sexuality was and not knowing where to turn. and I myself had kind of come out in an assembly, so that all of the children knew there was someone like them that they could come and speak to. So I found it really important, and at that time, you know, was kind of scrabbling around to find literature that I could direct them to, was supporting the librarian to make suggestions of having some inclusive literature put in the school library, etc. When I left teaching, I went into various charity work, worked for Mermaids, worked for Broken Rainbow UK before it disbanded. And as you said, Sophie, now work for Diversity Role Models when I'm not furloughed. My job role at DRM is about talking about what DRM does and the fact that we go into schools, we work with primary, secondary, we're working on, the team are working on early years content as well. Just trying to help schools be inclusive, especially with that lens of LGBT. But in the last year, not only has the world stopped turning for most people because of COVID, but myself and my wife have also become first-time parents through adoption.
Congratulations.
Thank you. On the 1st of July last year, we brought our then 18-month-old daughter home. We've had a massive change to our lives. No sleep since then.
Yeah.
But it's been a magical 9 months. And one of the things that we had always talked about throughout the adoption process with our social worker and just between us as a couple was how important we wanted to have story time and read books. And books was actually something that our little girl didn't have much access to when she was with her foster carer, partly because she had issues with her eyesight. And so a lot of the things she had were more stimulating visual toys with flashy lights. And actually, since she's come home to us, she is such a bookworm. She has books everywhere. Every single day, she will grab a book off the shelf and bring them to us. She has various favourites that go on a rolling system. But the importance for us is that they are inclusive and can cover a broader spectrum of inclusivity as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emma. Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
Lovely to see you. And I know you've told me that you've got some original artwork from your books in the background there.
I have. Yeah.
How wonderful. Tell me a bit about how you came to publishing and to writing the stories that you've been writing.
Well, similar to Emma, I was a primary school teacher for many years. And what happened was, when we started the adoption process, as a primary school teacher, I was used to reading lots of different fun books to the kids. And so I was hunting around just before our first son arrived for books, and there just weren't any for adopters. There was really kind of schmaltzy American ones about, I wished on a star for you. Or there were very hard-hitting ones from some of the adoption agencies, which really hammered home the points of being adopted. That's not what I wanted. I wanted something that I could pick off the shelves and, you know, make my kids smile. Anyway, so in that first year of adoption was quite hard for us because you kind of, you know, you handed a baby, and I'm an older mum, so all my other friends had babies, and I was on my own in these windy church halls talking to other mums about breastfeeding, which I'd never done. And I was so bored. And I was just going slowly bananas. And so I thought I need to keep occupied. So I decided to write stories, and I wrote loads of them. And then I spoke to a friend of mine who was an illustrator. I said, look, I've done this. What do you think? And so I put it together as a book and then sent it to a publisher. And he said, oh, it's a lovely idea, but it won't sell. And this would be about, 10 years ago now. And then I sent it to another publisher. I said, oh, I love it. He sat on it for 6 months. He said, I just can't. He said, it's so niche, you know, you're talking about adoption and you're talking about same-sex families. I can't see it happening. So I thought, right then, I'm going to do this myself. So I set up my own publishing house called Sparkly Poo Publications. And then I published them through at the time it was like an Amazon company, and now it got taken over by somebody else. And then and they just took off. So I wrote 2 dads and 2 mums, and my favourite is 2 mums in a menagerie. and they sell all over the world. And I get the most heartwarming messages on Twitter and through Facebook, or just emails saying, you know, they really do reflect our family, and I feel really proud. So they've gone to these adoption families and we had no representation before. It was just zero. And I was really keen as well to keep the word adoption in, because I was talking to one guy recently who was told to not talk about adoption, have same-sex families but not talk about adoption. But for me, that was really important. I really wanted it in there. It's only one word within the book, but it's important.
Sure. I mean, what's interesting is this idea of niche, because I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but obviously, and for us, there's a slight echo chamber, because obviously a lot of our friends and people that we know will be lesbian and gay parents and adopted parents and all kinds of different families. Nevertheless, it seems to me that everybody wants to read these stories. These aren't just stories for us. So I'm thrilled that your books are selling so well, Carolyn and Sarah. And you know, I think obviously things have moved on a great deal. So we're all different ages. And as a grandma, I'm claiming seniority, but when I think back to when I was growing up, the books that I had access to, I was very lucky. I had a library, and the things that I was reading were very wide and varied, but I don't remember any of these kinds of stories. There was very, very little representation, and I'm pretty sure any representation I came across would have been negative, actually. So I think, like a lot of people from my generation and further on, there was a lot of identifying with stories of, I mean, you know, otherness is very common, I think, in children's stories. So that there always has been that, and I think fairy tales do that really, really well. And so from that and other literature, one takes oneself and puts yourself in that role. But I can't even remember, I mean, how old I was when I first came across books for about lesbians. I mean, you know, a grown-up, certainly. And then with my own children, there was very, very little. I remember going to an Out with the Family event, which did you ever go to any of those, Emma? Were you there? Oh, you were there. Sarah.
Yeah, I've been to some as well.
Okay, so those were organised by Linda Riley, who is our diva patron, but she. So there would be stands, and there would be books about adoption and books about gay parenting, and all different routes to being a family and all different kinds of families. That was the first time I'd ever seen sort of collections of books that were like that. So I'd love to hear from you about any books that stood out for you as when you were growing up that might have been helpful to you. Carolyn, is there anything that you can remember reading?
I'm just laughing my head off, because I do remember. So I'm in my early 50s now. So there was nothing, absolutely nothing for me. And I remember the first time I ever heard of another lesbian was Martina Navratilova, right? And I remember wanting to know what she looked like, and going to the library and looking at books on tennis players and finding a picture of Martina and keeping it for weeks, just so I could take it, you know, I could take and look at this picture and read her biography. That was it. There was nothing. And my first ever book, I think it was really boring. I think it was Radcliffe's Hall, The Well of Loneliness, when I was at university, which was a real dirge. Yeah. But that was my first. That was my first foray. Yeah. That was Martina. Yeah. Thank you, Martina.
Yes, okay, Martina. What about you, Emma? Do you remember anything that stood out for you?
No, unfortunately for me. I mean, I'm probably the youngest. I'm 30. I turned 37 last month. But I'm a Section 28 baby, so there was nothing around. And for me, myself, I also grew up in a relatively hostile Christian household, so there was literally nothing that I could get my hands on. And I suppose in a similar vein, for me, my person was Ellen, and hearing, I used to watch Ellen as a sitcom, and suddenly I still to this day remember sitting watching the whole evening that Channel 4 devoted to the coming out episode, and then interviewing Ellen afterwards, and remember sitting in my bedroom with the TV on down quiet thinking, oh, I'm like her, she's like me, I'm not on my own. But in terms of books, there was nothing.
Yes. And what about you, Sarah? Is there anything that you remember from?
I mean, I'm sort of age-wise in between Carolyn and Emma, so yeah, you guessed that one right. I think there's 3 books actually, thinking about this, that kind of stand out, and that in itself probably shows there was a lot out there. So I remember probably at about the age of 10 or 11, again, they're all out of the library. Like I spent most of my time in the library. A book, I think it was called It's Not Fair, which essentially was a sort of like preteen guide to feminism, and it was brilliant, and it was all like in cartoons and all the rest of it, and I just thought this, and that really kind of woke me up to, oh gosh, this is this is what it's like being a girl as opposed to being a boy, and what that might mean, and what, all of that. And I think there was like one brief mention in there of like, they had like a little quiz of like things you might do with someone of the same sex or the opposite sex. This is 20, 30 years ago, so it's phrased like that. But even just opening the idea that, because obviously that was before marriage, before civil partnerships, but open the idea that you might live with somebody as a partner within that book. And that was kind of, felt pretty unexpected for that time. And then the other 2 books were, I don't know if anyone else read The Turbulent Tale of Tyke Tyler, which it's a book about, and for anyone who is yet to read it, I am going to do a spoiler. So all throughout, you assume, because of the way she behaves, that Tyke is a boy. And then right in the last scene, the teacher uses her full name. And you suddenly realise, and that for me, again, not about LGBTQ families, not about someone sort of coming out, but just about someone like messing with gender and being able to do that and get away with it. That was kind of quite a pivotal moment. And then the third one was a real classic, Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden, which was came out in the 80s, like was banned and burned and won the American Book Award. And it's just this beautiful love story between these 2 girls who are sort of age 15, 16, American book. But again, a bit like you and Martina Navratilova, like I kept taking that book out of the library. So the other poor kind of teenage lesbians in West London that never got their hands on this book because I had it. And yeah, again, just by chance, just because, and that's sort of why I so strongly believe that libraries are really important for queer people, because we might not find these things otherwise. And kind of we've all got a vested interest in just really like supporting and championing libraries which are underfunded, which are under-supported, because actually that, for many kids, that's your only place. You're going to find that representation. I know it's different now that you've got the internet, but I sound like I'm about 100, but yeah, just being able to like pick up a book and enter a story is for free, is such an amazing thing. I'm sure we're all great supporters of libraries. So then the next thing comes along, which is that you have children, and then you're looking around to see what there is available for them. And so I'm wondering, I mean, when I came out, my children were at primary school, and there was nothing. I'm sure, I don't even think the Penguin book had come out about the gay penguins. I don't think even that had come out. And I remember we lived in a small village, and I remember having to go into the headmaster and say, now this is going to be a story, and this is what's happening with our family. And a sort of absolute look of astonishment on his face, and sort of wondering what on earth he was going to do. And then the children everybody was fine. It was fine. But there was nothing to sort of prepare anybody, where books are so amazing at doing that, at helping children to find some context and
not to be just on their own. But I mean, there wasn't anything really. So I'd love to hear from you about what you found for your children before you started writing your own things, and whether they're, you know, what were the good ones out there for you, Sarah? What?
Yeah, because I sort of feel like we did a lot of searching out, so we did a lot of looking for books, and when they were very little, you know, the lovely kind of Leslie Newman Two Mums Two Dads books, you know, beautiful little board books. I couldn't get enough of Space Girl Pukes, and that kind of series again, just independently published by women who said we want to see these books, so that felt really important, and those were stories that we kind of all enjoyed. So I didn't feel like I couldn't go looking and find those books for my family.
Right.
What it made me realize, though, is like, unless you look for this, I think that is slightly shifting now. It is becoming slightly more accessible. Unless you look for this, you're not going to find it. So what about all the kids in my daughter's classes at school who are not going to be exposed to these kind of books, who might not know LGBT families? And so we come into a primary school as the only family with, confusingly in our case, 2 mums and 2 dads, because we co-parent, and there's sort of no, almost like you said, there's no preparation, there's no like context you can put that in. So people learn about us and they get used to us and they think, who's the childminder? Oh, nobody. They're both the mums, and you know, that you get through that. But it just sort of felt like, you know, the school got in the Leslie Newman books and a few others because we mentioned it, but it would just have been so lovely for that to be kind of normal, that all kids get to see these kind of stories and read these kind of books. So I think there are loads more of those books on the market now, both independently published and through mainstream publishers. But yeah, I think the challenge is, how do we get them into schools and libraries alongside everything else? Yeah.
And Emma, what about you? What are some books that I know that you're like reading different amazing books to your daughter all the time, but are there any standout ones that you found?
Well, obviously, when she came to us, she was 18 months. So we kind of wanted to start real basic. And she's recently started to learn the letters of the alphabet. So we're using the A to Z of equality, which is a lovely little board book. And it literally is like, A is asexual all the way through to Z being Z, which is known as a pronoun for some people within the trans community. And it's kind of inclusive as well. There's kind of F is for feminism. So there's all different things in there. And N is no, and it talks about consent. So we absolutely love that book, and the pictures and the colours in it are fantastic. But then we've also really enjoyed kind of mixing up the fairy tales. So we've got a couple of books that we bought that just twist your classic fairy tales. So I'm trying to think, the other night I read Goldie Socks and the Three Bears, and it was all kind of mixed up. And also the girl power fairy tales where, you know, Sleeping Beauty isn't lying in wait, waiting for some Prince Charming to come along. She sorts it all out by herself. And just things like that are really, really enjoyable for us as parents to read, but also for her to kind of start learning about those differences.
And do you see her gravitate to particular kinds of stories, or what are the things that you feel that she's getting the most out of?
Yeah, well, one of her favourites that she's pulling off time and time again at the minute is Odd Dog Out by Rob Biddulph. So his illustrations are fantastic, but it's all about a sausage dog who wears a rainbow hat and a rainbow scarf, but all the other dogs are all in very uniformed, like there's a page and they're all wearing suits and bowler hats and have a suitcase, or they're all playing football and they're all wearing football shirts, but Odd Dog Out isn't fitting in. So he decides he's going to get on a plane and go and try and find somewhere where he can be himself. And he suddenly finds himself, which kind of a play on like being in America, where suddenly everybody looks like him and he's like, yes, I fit in. And then he comes across another dog who doesn't fit in. He's wearing a beret and wearing like a different jumper. And he's like, oh, I know what that feels like. And this other dog's like, no, I enjoy standing out. It makes me different. It makes me who I am. And suddenly it's like, ding. Yeah. Oh yeah, actually, I enjoyed being the odd dog out. I should be proud of who I am. So he gets back on the plane, goes back, and actually finds that everybody else had missed him and had started to tweak to their own individual styles. And it kind of finishes with just like, be proud, be who you are. And she finishes it, and we say, be proud, and she goes, be, and she goes, who you are. So it's one of her favourites we read on a regular basis.
That does sound wonderful. Yeah, and as you say, I mean, I think we'll talk more about this, but it's obviously not about necessarily just having the focus on the thing that you want to talk about in particular, whether that's adoption or being gay, but more about including that as a background maybe, or an aspect of it that's part of the story, but that isn't necessarily the focus of the story. So Carolyn, tell us about what you found for your children.
Yeah, just coming back to that point you just made though, about the focus. I really do believe that, because I think that some books can be quite earnest and pushing a point about being gay, and actually that can be off-putting. And I think I think having a narrative is really important, and telling a story. And that's why I wrote Two Mums and a Menagerie, actually, because I wrote it specifically for my boys. I wanted to have poo in it, and I wanted it to have dog poo. You know what kids like, don't they? They're like poo, smells, mess. And I wanted it to be funny. And the fact that it's got two mums is completely incidental. And so I think that's super, super important, that we don't try hammer home, you know, we've got two mums, we've got two dads. No, it should be incidental. And because that wouldn't happen in a heteronormative book. You know, you wouldn't keep hanging on about it. Anyway, sorry. But to your original point, I mean, I struggled from an adoption perspective massively, as I said before. We found Tango Makes Three, which is about some penguins, which was a lovely story about San Francisco Zoo, and two penguins, two male penguins who adopt a little egg because they were looking after a stone. It's super cute. So I found that one, and also Sarah, the books you mentioned before, The Space Girl Pukes, and If I Had 100 Mummies.
If I had is it 100? Yeah, if I had 100
mummies. Whatever. So, but it was quite thin on the ground for us. I couldn't find a lot that represented, and because I'm a mum of two boys, I like you, Emma, I wanted to find some quite feminist books as well, you know, to help my boys. Although my eldest is now out and proud, so he's adorable. But so I remember reading. I don't know if you've come across the Paper Bag Princess, which is a brilliant book, and Princess Smarty Pants. Yeah, I just love those two. They just again turning it on its head. But no, sadly, there's very little for when we started out on our adoption journey, which was in 2009, so a long time ago. Nothing, absolutely nothing really for us, for our same-sex families.
So 10 years later now, we find, is it, did you say 2009?
2009, yeah, that's when we started our adoption journey.
Yeah, so 12 years later now, we're finding hopefully things are changing. Obviously, Sarah and Carolyn, you're contributing to our children's literature, and Emma, I think that you've got a book that's going to make its way into the world. And things are different now. And I'm wondering about what you find now in terms of as a grandmother, I must say I'm a little bit apprehensive about. I try to have stories with my grandchildren that are inclusive. There's so many wonderful books out there now, and there are books about gay grandparents. I'm nervous because my grandchildren are only 2 and 3, and I know that there's going to be that next bit. They're at nursery now, but the older one's going to primary school soon, and then there's going to be the what do you mean, you know, all those questions. And so our books, obviously, and our stories can help our children as they go, as they're going to be having those conversations at school. And I guess I'm sort of sliding them into the pile a bit so that they have some answers, because there's going to be questions. I know there will be at their school. And I find that really difficult, I must say. So the books are essential, I think. Sarah, you started writing for older children before your children had got to that age. I find that really interesting. So were you anticipating this issue?
I think we'd already started to notice that, there wasn't a lot of representation within middle grade books. So the picture books were kind of coming on. Young adult was, able to kind of deal with it, but it didn't feel there was a lot kind of preteen. So initially, I think my partner wrote to authors that we liked, because she's quite proactive like that, and said, "Are you going to put some same-sex families in your books? What are you going to do?" And we had a couple of really nice responses, and actually those are authors now which I see kind of responding and engaging, and that's really interesting. But what really prompted it was, again, out of a bit like Carolyn, of seeing a gap, but it was a different gap. So it was a gap when we had our kids and realized there weren't. We looked for a parenting book, and there's a brilliant Diva parenting book from 20 years ago, and then there's some American stuff, but there didn't feel to be anything that actually expressed some of the diversity around LGBTQ families, and also was able to talk about things like how you do gender roles, how you maintain an LGBT identity, how you talk to your kids about homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. That just didn't. It was on blogs and it was in forums, but it didn't really exist. So my partner and I researched a parenting guide. So it all started by talking to 70 or so families, including people who brought up their kids in the 70s, people just starting their families now, grown up kids who had LGBT parents. And so that became a book that we published with a parenting publisher back in 2017. And then the stories people told me when I was researching that about their families were so fascinating, and just really, really stuck with me. And there was one story of a woman I spoke to who had transitioned while her kids were teenagers, and I spoke to both her and to her daughter quite at length about what that was like, and that just stuck with me as a story. So I've always written, but I never set out to write for children. But I had this story that had a 12-year-old girl at the center who's who is in the situation where one of her parents was transitioning, and what that meant for her at school and in her own feelings. So I started writing that story. So it became a book for that age group because that was where the main character sat. But it wasn't a kind of conscious, A, I'm going to write a book, or B, I'm going to write a book about these things. It was more like, there's this story and I want to tell it and I want to write it. And then, I've got 40,000 words. Let's see what I can do with this. And I think the experience of having published nonfiction meant that I felt quite confident in trying to get it, at least giving a go with mainstream publishing. And I had kind of, like every author, kind of knockbacks, but I think I've never kind of had a negative reaction because it is a story about transitioning or about LGBT, and there's kind of quite a lot of LGBT characters in the book. It's not just the central family, and so whenever there's been kind of hostility, which there has, I found other authors and publishers have kind of got behind it. So there are lots of issues, I think, around inclusion still in publishing. There's a huge long way to go, but there's a lot of kind of really positive individuals trying to make change happen. So luckily now my kids are old enough indeed to read and hopefully enjoy the books, but it wasn't it had a more sort of organic journey to completion.
When you say hostility, what sort of thing do you mean in the publishing industry? Or
no, within just you won't be surprised to learn you publish a book that has got a trans central character who is like everybody, a mix of kind of warm and, an annoying parent and just like a real person. Reviewers on Amazon, people on Twitter will say that this is not appropriate for children, and will sort of have a go at your publisher for publishing something like
so
this.
Because there are people out there who are that they've got an agenda, and that's what
and there's still very much a feeling, I think, among some places that you shouldn't be talking about LGBT identities with young children, that it's somehow unsuitable and not age appropriate. And I think that kind of plays in. I think there's still quite a bit of anxiety around it. So being able to kind of, just keep presenting our stories as just as valid as everyone else's is a kind of way to counteract that.
Yes, and help those people's children.
Yeah, absolutely. Sneak the books in, get them in the libraries.
Can you bring you've got two of your books behind you there? Could I see them? You
could.
Yes. Let's
so
show everybody.
This is, can I get in the light? This is Nothing Ever Happens Here, which is the story I was just talking about Dee, who transitions, and her family, and Izzy at the centre of it all. And they live in a tiny village, by the way, in East Anglia, where nothing ever happens.
And that's what nomination for a Carnegie Award, is that right?
That was, yes. Yeah, that came out last year. And then the other one is called Proud of Me, which is a family with two mums, and the two children are both sort of age 13 and are almost twins, but they've each got a different birth mum and they share the same anonymous donor. So one of the plot lines is one of the twins wants to find out about the donor and the other one doesn't. And he does make some quite questionable choices in trying to do that. And the other twin starts to work out that, how do you come out as gay when your parents are gay? What's that like? So there's a lot of different kind of, all gleaned from the people that I spoke to for the parenting guide. But again, issues which are perhaps quite complex when you're 9, but by the time you get to 11 or 12, are really kind of, meaty stuff about family and friendship and what makes a family. And yeah, I mean, like Carolyn said, I really try and do it in a way that isn't like trying to make a point, but it's just about saying all our families are like messy and confusing. And, if we kind of try and be honest with each other and love each other, then that untangles a lot of mess. But because it's a story, you've got to have a lot of mess to get it to get untangled. Yeah.
Great. Yes, I was just there was a question I wanted to ask Emma about. I know, of course, because you work in schools, and I wondered, given what Sarah was saying about there still being parents who are hesitant to discuss these issues with children who feel, and as we know, reading the news, obviously there are sometimes protests, and so you in your work with diversity role models, you work very closely with schools, so you know about what different policies there are. How do you find that things are at the moment? Obviously, we've got a particular government at the moment. There's a whole other thing that's nothing to do with literature that we know about, but what is policy going on at the moment in primary schools in particular?
I mean, across the board, the inclusive sex and relationships education changes have now come into force. Just unfortunately, kids weren't in school at the time. So, schools have been shut. However, it is still now the case that it is now a legal requirement that sex and relationships education needs to be inclusive. However, within that, the wording is very loose, shall we say, especially for primary schools. However, the one area that they are now meant to be inclusive is when discussing families. So, it fits right into this conversation that actually, if primary schools are going to have any conversation at all about LGBTQI+, it's going to be talking about the fact that a family isn't just mum, dad, children.
Yes.
They've got to start talking about it. And when diversity role models go into primary schools, the conversation is just that. We are talking about different families. We are saying you could have a family with one mum. You could have a family with 2 dads. You could actually live with your grandparents full time under special guardianship. You could have a mum and a dad. You could have a mum and a dad who look like a different colour to each other. Different religions, have that whole inclusive encompassing. And then the person who will share their lived experience will be part of the LGBT community, and we'll talk about surrogacy, adoption, IVF, but just from a very simple, when I get to go back and I get to do it, I'll be talking about how I adopted my daughter, but we still do all the things that you guys might do with your parents. So we go to the park, we play on the swings, we'll go to the zoo, to prove in some ways, and I hate the word, that we are normal and that we're just like you. That they can kind of start to understand that there are differences, but we're alike at the same time. And we, with the youngest ones, we use And Tango Makes Three as a reading narrative. And again, we'll flick back and say, you know, are Roy and Silo good parents? What makes them good parents? And they're able to tell us that they feed Tango, they teach Tango to swim, they look after the egg and roll it so she's kept warm, and all those things that make sure she's looked after and she's cared for, which is what you want from a parent. And it doesn't matter that at the end, it's two men who are doing that. But yeah, the wording is loose. So,
right. So there's a lot of room for interpretation still. Yeah. Because I saw the whole thing, that some newspaper story that came up about how you were going to have to write parent or caregiver instead of mum or dad. And I thought, in the letters home and things, and I thought, actually, that's been happening for ages, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I am already one of those annoying parents where I've gone into nursery and Dee has only been in nursery for about a month. And day 2, I'd gone back in and gone, you know, on this form you got us to do, that's a bit of a, this is about me so you can understand my child. And you asked, what do I like to do with mum and dad? Can you please change that to parent carer? Because actually for my daughter, she was with a carer before us and now she's with her parents. So can you make sure it's all inclusive?
And what was their reaction to that?
They said they would definitely pass it on, whether it's changed or not, but they'll know I'm not the kind of parent already to let it slip.
Right.
And I will be checking.
Yeah.
But
I mean, some parents feel very confident. I mean, obviously, you've got a wonderful background in campaigning and activism and working with charities that deal with this. But not all of us feel so confident, do we? Approaching schools and teachers and making a farce and all that sort of thing. So obviously, books are a great. You know, they're a great introduction to those teachers and those school administrators as well, to help them about how to. Is it a thing? Carolyn, have you ever given any of your books into schools or been into schools with your picture books? No,
I have. I also taught for 20 years in inner London schools, and I did come across a lot of homophobia. I worked in church schools for my sins. I worked in 2 church schools by accident. I was a supply teacher and I stayed on. But anyway, that was really hard because, the demographic was just so very religious. And I think I would have been burnt at the stake if they knew I was a lesbian teacher at that school, seriously.
Really?
Yeah, I'm worried.
Well, that would have all been through Section 28 as well, all that time.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a school which I had actually written the books by then, but I just couldn't come out of that school. Whereas my first school, I was out and proud and literally skipping around in my rainbow DMs. So it's interesting, the difference between schools, and I just felt like I just didn't feel I could tackle the culture of that school. I just couldn't. So yeah, but in terms of me going into schools, I've gone into schools and nurseries in my books generally, and they've been very, very well received. But that's because I've been invited.
Right. Yeah.
So I've not pushed myself in there. But I mean, in terms of homophobia and how my books received, like you, Sarah, I've had quite a lot of trolling. Twitter's I've been trolled on, reviews. People writing really nasty things in reviews, but I can trump all trolling of my books in that one of the 2 dads' books got sent back to me, and somebody had got hold of a copy and basically inserted. This is at the printing stage. Inserted basically children's Bible stories and put them in the middle of my books, and then they got sent to some poor so-and-so in Germany who'd ordered them, which I thought was incredible. So it's happened 3 times now. So I'm being trolled at source. And it was all about, how God makes a family. But literally in the middle of my book, and I wish I had it here now. It's been printed inside and then shipped. It's incredible. Wow. So yeah, there is a lot of trolling that goes on, but I just think it's so great that it's out there, And one thing I was going to say, Emma, as an adopter now, one thing that kind of makes me very angry about the whole situation around protests at school is that the government's now legislated for LGBT people to adopt. So legally, you know, they put that out there. So those children need now protection. I'm not saying that other, you know, birth families don't, but I'm just saying our kids are extraordinarily vulnerable because they've often been removed from families. And then to see people outside of school protesting against a family that I find that incredible. I would outlaw protest tomorrow, because you can't do that to children. You cannot, you know, it's just, you know, I'm sorry, it just makes me really angry and incensed that my kids saw that on the news. It was awful, absolutely awful. So I would, it needs to be outlawed completely. Protests should be banned outside schools about the fact that we're just trying to normalize our types of families. Anyway.
And I have to say, I really struggle with the phrase age appropriate. Because for me, if my daughter can understand something, then it doesn't matter if you think it's age appropriate and 2 is too young for me to talk about something. If she's asking me a question or she understands something, then I'm going to talk openly to her about it so that she gets it. So when people sort of turn around and say, oh, you shouldn't really talk about this or that in front of your 2-year-old. Well, my 2-year-old's got 2 mums. So if I'm going to talk about same-sex families, I'm going to talk about it from the age of 18 months when she came home and she became part of a same-sex family. Because for her, it's appropriate, regardless of what age she is. So I although we use it quite a lot in my area of work, I really hate the phrase.
Yes, of course. Well, children tend to take in what they want to take in at different ages, and sometimes that you can say something to them that you think is a very good scientific explanation of something, but they're not ready to hear that, whatever it is. And then at some point later on, they come to it. So, I mean, they have their own filters and, you know, obviously their own system of understanding the world as well, which is at all different stages, not the same for every child, is it? You know, we all come to things at different ages, our understanding of the world. But I'm so interested in this idea of the imagination and the books that you're providing, and what a difference that is going to make to our children, to their friends, who they're going to share their stories with. And I'm really hoping that these books will become more widely available in schools, as well as, you know, now we have the benefit of being able to Google search things, or other search engines are available. But we can look for things that are appropriate. Obviously, we've all been doing that for a while now, trying to find the right things. So just to close, in terms of what we're Carolyn, I wanted to see your books because we saw Sarah's. Do you have them available?
I've got Two Mums and a Menagerie.
Yes.
Which is my favourite one, because I really like this one. Two Dads.
Yes.
Will Young read that recently on CBeebies, which was really good. And then my other one,
that's amazing.
That's fantastic.
Two Mums, which again it's got a very foxy mum in. I think, yeah. I want her to be my mum. Anyway, so I've done those. I've also written a book for adopters as well, about the adoption story, but that's it.
Great. And so, and in terms of your books, we can find them
on Amazon, Gaze the Word, bookshops. Just normal place. Right. Bookshops. Are they open now? Yeah, they're open.
Yeah. As of Monday. They are back.
Yes. They are finally open again. Yes, and the same with your books, Sarah. They're available online and in bookshops too.
Yep.
Great. And Emma's going to be writing. She's going to get on with the. You're not busy with work and a 3-year-old now. Is your daughter
2 years, 3 months?
2 years, 3 months. Okay, isn't it? So that hardly keeps one busy at all.
But I should say, if people follow our family Instagram account, so @familym_m, every time we read a book with our daughter, we put it on our highlights and they're also separated down. So there's an LGBT History Month one, there's a Black History Month one, there's a Inspiring Women. But every time we read a book, normally it's bedtime stories, we'll share it with everybody and then put it on our highlights. So you'll find Carolyns book under one of our highlights.
Fantastic. And I'm gonna search out for Will Young reading it too. So
yeah,
it's a great resource with our children.
That was lovely. That was really lovely.
Story.
Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and obviously to share our stories as parents and writing and readers as well, obviously, because it's so nice to be able to read those books with your children. It's not just for them, is it? So fantastic. Thank you very much, and I look forward to reading your books and seeing you again soon, I hope. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.